And Andy, let me just interrupt you for a moment here, because in my ear, the producer is saying that the birthright citizenship case is the first one. We do not know the result, yes, but that is coming. Shannon is looking at it now, Andy.
Yeah, you know, I have to make one overarching observation about this, Dana. When we were here last year doing all this, it felt much more consequential. Not to say that Supreme Court cases are anything other than consequential, but last year we had these cases that were on which the balance of the 2024 election seemed to rise and fall. And I'm kind of thankful to be back in an environment where the Supreme Court is doing what the Supreme Court does, and it doesn't feel like the democracy itself hinges on it.
And Jonathan, as we stand by and wait for Shannon Bream to update us on what the decision was, the way I understand it is SCOTUS isn't necessarily ruling on the constitutionality of birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment. They're going to be ruling on the ability for these lower district judges to issue these nationwide injunctions. So depending on what we hear today, we're still going to have question marks about birthright citizenship. Is that right?
That's right. And with the national injunctions or universal injunctions issue, the justices obviously were concerned. They have previously expressed their discontent with district courts issuing these orders. So there does seem to be a majority saying that this exceeded authority. The question is, how will they thread this needle? How will they limit the district courts
Jonathan, let me just interrupt you.
Forward?
I'm sorry for the interruption, but Shannon has some information for us. Let's go to you, Shannon Bream. You're there with that case?
Okay, yes. So this is at least a partial, if not a full, and we're reading this because there are several concurrences here, but it's written by Justice Barrett, which goes against the ruling that I just gave the guidance because she's one of the least junior justices, but she was assigned to write this opinion. And essentially what she says some say that the universal injunctions give the judiciary a powerful tool to check the executive branch, but she says federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given to them. When a court concludes the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power, sounding very much like they are limiting these injunctions. We know here that they have granted at least partially the stay to these preliminary injunctions, but they say only to the extent that the injunctions are broader than necessary to provide complete relief to each plaintiff with standing to sue. They say the lower courts have to move expeditiously with respect to each of these plaintiffs. It says the injunctions are also stayed to the extent that they prohibit executive agencies from developing and issuing public guidance about the executive plans to implement the executive order. If you remember, part of this executive order on birthright citizenship, the stay was that the agencies that would be responsible for actually implementing the change with birthright citizenship, those agencies couldn't even start making a plan. So that part of it is lifted as well. We do see that the dissent here comes from the three justices you expect. It looks like Justice Sotomayor filed the dissent. Kagan and Jackson joined that. Justice Jackson also filed a dissenting opinion, but there are a lot of concurrences here. Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, there are others. So we'll parse through this, but at its first blush, it looks like this is a win in putting a limit on these nationwide injunctions. We'll see how far those limits go as we dig back through this.
Got it. Want to bring Jonathan Turley back in. Shannon, thank you. So, Jonathan, it sounds like this is kind of what you were mentioning earlier. 6-3 decision granting a partial stay on these nationwide injunctions unless there's a broader impact. Kind of decipher that for us.
Well, I've only started to read the opinion, but what I've seen does look like a victory for the Trump administration. Justice Barrett is saying that the only way for justices to exercise this type of universal injunction in some of these cases is equitable relief. But she does not find evidence that that type of relief was granted to these judges. So they indicate that the administration is likely to prevail on this issue. All of that is going to be awfully good news for this administration. They have been really hit with these sort of Lilliputian attacks. There are all these individual district judges effectively freezing federal policy and programs across the country. So it does appear to be a victory. It may be a bit more nuanced, but so far it looks like a good day for the Trump administration.
Andy, a question for you. Again, here are my dumb questions. This is not on the merits of birthright citizenship then, it looks like, but am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I think we never get to the merits because of the injunction issue. And it seemed to me that what made this case very interesting to people at the beginning was the birthright citizenship question and the very important question of whether that's compelled by the 14th Amendment or not. As the case was litigated, it really became this other thing, which was about these nationwide injunctions, which, for the reasons that Jonathan just mentioned, are the thing that has plagued the Trump administration across the board in its second term.
Andy, Jonathan, stand by. I want to bring in Shannon Bream once again. Shannon, I understand you're getting more details on the dissent in this case. Fill us in.
Yeah. I always think it's helpful to turn there because you can get a sense of exactly what they're pushing back against with all these different concurrences. And what they said is, because remember, again, this comes to us in the vehicle of the birthright citizenship case. And the questions at oral arguments were, OK, what if district judges decide differently and they aren't able to give an order for the entire country? Would a child be born in New Mexico have a different right than one in New Jersey, depending on how those judges have ruled in different places? Justice Sotomayor, writing for the dissent, says the parents of children covered by what she's calling the citizenship order would be well advised to file promptly class action suits and to request temporary injunctive relief for the class pending class certification. And so she's saying, listen, if you're one of these parents who are worried about what's going to happen with the citizenship of your child, you should be out there filing so that there will not be this patchwork, that every district will have an opportunity to weigh in. But she also says, get these cases moving quickly. She says lower courts would be advised to act swiftly on these requests for relief and to adjudicate the cases as quickly as they can so as to enable this court's prompt review, saying we have not decided that birthright citizenship question. We want the lower courts to act quickly so there's not this patchwork, so it gets back here and they actually answer the question on substance. She goes on to say this: today the court abdicates its vital role in these efforts, saying with the stroke of a pen, the president has, quote, made a solemn mockery of our Constitution. She said, pointing at the president, and then she goes on to blame the court. Rather than stand firm, this court gives way. So clearly the dissent not in line with what has been decided by the majority of this court. Again, we'll continue to read through those concurrences as well.
Andy, here's a little bit from what Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote in the majority part. She said that federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. And then this is a sentence I really noted. She said, when a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. And that might just be where this all came down to, Andy.
Well, yeah, of course. What they're saying is that this practice of nationwide injunctions, which we went almost 200 years of American history without having a single one, involves a court not only making a decision that binds the parties before it, but making a decision for the whole nation under circumstances where the court is the non-political branch that doesn't answer to the people whose lives are affected by these rulings. And I think it's interesting what Shannon just told us about Justice Sotomayor's suggestion that you go to class actions. That would even that, I think, would be a victory for the Trump administration in the sense that class actions are much more rigorous and much more regulated than the idea of these district judges in a completely untethered way just making rulings that apply to the whole country.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.